Good afternoon and welcome to the 8th session of the UMA Doctoral Seminar Series. UMA is the Institute for Humanities in Africa at the University of Cape Town. My name is Dominique Samda. I'm a researcher at UMA. The seminar is streaming currently on Facebook, and you can also find a recording of the session on the UMA YouTube channel. So the last quarters, we have invited speakers to reflect on the challenges and strategies of doctoral work, with a particular focus on the turning points and critical experiences that shape their research journey. At the end of the session, I have the pleasure to announce the new season starting in August. But today we are welcoming Babacar Faye, Dr. Babacar Faye, and he will present on challenging the idea of the public intellectual as a social media researcher. Before introducing Dr. Faye, I'd like to say that to avoid Zoom bombing, as we had to deplore an episode of it, we're asking participants to please rename themselves to include their full names. You might find yourself temporarily placed in the waiting room otherwise. So please, if you can, rename yourselves. Dr. Babacar Faye is a postdoctoral fellow at UMA at the University of Cape Town. He holds a PhD from the University of Cheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, a master's in American Cultural Studies from Bowling Green State University in the US, and a master's in intercultural mediations, identities, mobilities, and conflict from the University of Lille in France. He has a solid academic background in intercultural, he has a solid academic background in intercultural mediation and conflict resolution. Babacar has been the interim academic director of the School for International Study Training. It was my former boss as well, and I think I have a problem just saying the name, so that's why I keep mispronouncing it. So it's SIT, School for International Training, and he was the academic director for two programs in Senegal, Senegal Global Security and Religious Pluralism, and Senegal Hip Hop, African Diaspora and Decolonial Futures. At UMA, his research focuses on new social movements in the post-industrial West and the decolonial African context, focusing on the role of social media and hip-hop as a medium. Sorry, how we speak about things like reveal a lot about ourselves. Okay, thank you, Babacar. I'm very honored to have you today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dominique. Thanks. I thank you for inviting me for this doctoral seminars. I also thank Huma for organizing this stuff. I'm really happy today to be speaking at the doctoral seminar. So maybe I have to share my screen. This. Can you see it now?
We can, yes.
All right, so maybe I have to do this. So okay, so the title of this talk is challenging the idea of the public intellectual as a social media researcher. So as I remember, Dom, we were talking about how I could present something on methodology because it is aimed at primarily to doctoral students, but myself, I'm going to talk more about theory than practice or methods, and I apologize in advance to that. So because I am more in the theoretical practice. So coming to Huma also is an opportunity for me to be part and parcel of a team, and I hope that, and I strongly believe that I'll be learning more about methodologies and how to engage with fieldwork. So the outline, I'm first going to talk about the little story, because it is a very American way of always starting off. Whenever you write an article or a book, you have to start with little story, how it came all about. And second, I will talk about the traditional intellectualism and its contradictions. And I will finish by talking how to engage the tensions of intellectualism as a social media researcher. So the true story, it happened 10 years ago at BGSU. I was doing studies in American cultural studies, and I wrote a master's thesis on political spontaneity and Senegalese new social movement, because back then Y'en a Marre was rising against Abdoulaye third bid for power, and I was following Facebook and social media, and I thought that it was time to reread Frantz Fanon. And by the way, I discovered Fanon in the US rather than in Senegal. I think also this is an opportunity for us to think about the curriculum of our universities. Why do we have to discover Fanon, Frantz Fanon, in Northern European American universities rather than on the continent? I think this is also something that we have to engage with. So in the master thesis, I was interested in theoretically in the possibility of changing society without taking power. And I was really inspired by John Holloway's book of the same title, and also critically analyzing the power of digital communities, virtual agoras, and digital literacy in the 2011 Senegalese context. So intellectualism, I think there are four major contradictions. And first, I will start off by saying that intellectual interventions can be in the forms of speeches, articles, books, and blogs. And intellectuals have to have what is called self-positioning, how they position themselves vis-a-vis the public and vis-a-vis the society at large. So whether consciously or unconsciously, so this self-positioning is constructed around either a school of thought or a methodological position or even a political cause. And I will be talking about politics. What is politics? Should intellectual engage on the terrain? So there are four, and in the intellectual interventions, there is a major consequence, which is the way intellectuals position or perceive themselves and how they are perceived and positioned by others is going to affect their symbolic and institutional recognition, but also, and perhaps most importantly, the reception of their ideas and its dissemination. So I think it's very important whenever you position yourself, either consciously or unconsciously, it's going to have a major content, which is how you see yourself, but how they see you, and also the recognition and your ideas and how they are going to be received. So there is four major axes of contradictions: hierarchy versus equality, generality versus expertise, passion versus distance, and the individual versus the collective. The hierarchy, equality contradiction. So intellectuals, I mean, more often than not, they think that they are endowed or they have the right or they are well placed to judge situations and also to eliminate the masses. And this is come with the, in the Western tradition, how the idea of the intellectual came to be, they are people apart, the lettered people, they have the power and the knowledge to eliminate the masses and to speak on behalf of them, right? And also because the masses, they need representation, right? So this is the power that they kind of self-proclaimed authority and power. And plus they position themselves as defenders of progressist ideas, Republicans, principle, and what have you. And in this tradition, I could not help but talk about Jean-Paul Sartre and Michel Foucault. So there is a kind of a debate. Sartre was talking about the idea of a total intellectual with unprecedented power and status, but later he developed a more skeptical, sort of Maoist-inspired intellectualism, which wanted intellectuals to engage more in horizontal, also intersubjectivity. And after Sartre, Foucault came in, talking about the specific intellectual who does not claim superiority, but he, or she wanted to enable lay people to conceptualize, and understand the complexities of the social plane of interaction. And so this is the kind of debate that happened in the French tradition, at least, between hierarchy and equality, and between Sartre and Foucault. So the main tension here is self-proclaimed authority versus egalitarian principle. How can they self-proclaim authority and at the same time wanting to fight for egalitarian principle? I think there is a kind of a tension out there that we should engage. Second, it is the generality versus expertise tension. At some point, the professionalization of the social sciences and also specialization, intellectual wanted to, to limit themselves in a particular speciality. And whenever one wanted to go beyond one's area of expertise, one could lose his or her credibility. So this is what people thought. And here we have the Sartre-Foucauldian sort of debate. But after Foucault and Sartre, we had Bourdieu talking about totalizing ambition, critiquing Sartre's ambition, who wanted to discriminate between fields, between philosophy, journalism, literature. But the main question here, I think, is given the complexities of the delusion plane of immanence and the tensions thereon, should intellectuals develop specific expertise in some local contexts only to limit their political intellectual intervention to those specific areas? And here I put political and intellectual slash, because at some point I will talk about intellectuals and politics. So the main tension here is to should intellectuals limit themselves in their area of expertise instead of or earlier in place of talking about something. And the last tension, I think, is the individual and the collective. Here I will come. I'm not going to come with affirmation. I'm just gonna. I'll be coming with questions. How should or shall we? And when I say we, I'm talking about intellectuals, broadly. How shall we or should we engage the tension between individual responsibility and the need for public engagement with the collective? What kinds of self-positioning can help us balance our personal conviction on the one hand, and on the other, the need for coordinated actions with larger entities like political parties and organizations of the like. I will give an example. For example, there is you might have heard the rising of PASTEF in Senegal, which is the political party of Ousmane Sonko, who has been entering, the political arena in Senegal in an unprecedented way. Myself, I am a sympathizer, a sympathisant in French. I don't know how it is in English. But in France, PASTEF members wanted me to join the party and be part and parcel of the organization, taking up a role in there. But I always refused, because sort of, even though I am supporting the project of Ousmane Sonko, at the same time, I want to keep my critical distance vis-a-vis what's going to happen within or beyond the party. So even myself, it had been a kind of a tension for me. How should I buy the member card and join the party? Because, as you know, political parties, the way they function, there is kind of a discipline. You can't be within and have a certain way of doing. So I prefer rather to be outside or to walk along the party and keeping my my critical distance, because I think this is what we should. So this is a kind of a tension that we all face. So there is also Bourdieu talking about, in this individual collective axis of tension, the l'intellectual collective. And this is maybe what's happening with Homer, for example. I think the idea of social scientists that are teaming up in collaborative work and research efforts that are connected to a kind of international or a transnational political agenda to fight not only against market-oriented rationality or the neoliberal orthodoxy, but also to engage with ways in which how we could, for example, decolonize our African university, how we could engage the humanities from within Africa. So I think this is also, very important. Instead of the individual, we can talk about l'intellectual collective, which is not one body, but a collective of body working together for some common agenda. So, and last now, for the third part, I'm going to talk about the tension, how we can engage attention as a social media research. So social media, maybe I'm going to say social media research here, or digital ethnographer, virtual ethnographer, or online. So I think at some point they are interchangeable. So with the emergence of new media platforms, some people are talking about, the invisible college, that reaches far beyond the bricks and mortar of academy. So I think there's something happening. Academics should or have to engage, this invisible college, because a lot is happening on there. And with the web-based technologies, social media researchers, intellectuals have a greater public outreach, as the print-based mediator's role is shrinking. Remember, the emergence of social media, of the internet, some people are saying it is the same momentum as, back then in the last centuries with print-based, revolutions, So we have the same. The text at some point was something revolutionary, and now we have the visual or the virtual, right? And also there are some potentials, as there is a more intimate relationship between digital ethnographers come social media intellectual and the public, there emerges a kind of a more dialogical relationality. I think also we have to talk about this, how we, and with the emergence, the possibilities of online ethnography, we tend to be more and more, or we have a more and more intimate relationship with not only the object or the subject, because at some point the subject and the object are sort of, they're intermingled, so we can dissociate them, so to speak. And once the hierarchy established by the mediators disappears, the tensions between expertise and generality, detachment and passionate commitment have a chance really of being alleviated, but it can also be aggravated. So the question is now, which of these possibilities becomes reality seems to depend partly on the intellectual's awareness of the public with which they're engaging. So we have, it is not the tool that can make it, that can alleviate or aggravate. I think it is our relationship and our awareness of the people we're engaging with, right? And the acceptance of the fact that people also, those people, I mean, they're intellectuals as we, and they have the same dispositions to understand and to take part in the co-production of knowledge and the co-production of understanding what's happening around us. And I think so. Here I'm just talking about the possibilities of that the internet is giving us here. So what kind of intellectuals now? And I think I will finish by this slide. I think with the web-based technologies, because things are open-ended, would-be intellectuals have more possibilities to reach out to people, because remember, the mediators, which are print-based processes, peer review, or just publishing companies, there is a kind of a filter. So there is a long process. But with the internet, those barriers sort of collapse, and then intellectual people can just broadcast themselves and just be and reach out to people in order to talk about whatever they want to talk about. So there is another advantage of online media platform. When intellectuals do feel the duty to comment on issues beyond their areas of expertise, it is likely and very likely that they choose the role of a facilitator or the mediator rather than adopting a kind of an I know it all attitude. And I think this is very important. At some point, we might play the role of a facilitator, facilitating dialogues between people of all walks of life, being a mediator rather than being the sole intellectual or the total intellectual, to speak like Sartre, because I think there is a kind of shift that are happening in there. There also emerge a kind of momentum where intellectuals have been losing their authoritative status and power, and have, or at least should, develop a more democratic interaction with their publics. Also here we see that, for good or for worse, I don't know, intellectuals are losing their power for a more democratic interaction or dialogue with their public. Now the question is now how to engage with the pervasive personal broadcasting. We have Facebook Live video. Remember back then, it is something new. It is, the people are also producing news and content-based, knowledge. So it is not only that we intellectually we are producing, everybody can produce knowledge and share it, right? YouTube, extra. So how can we discover the art of orality and bring it back into the mainstream of argumentation? I think also one of the main problematic of the Western university is that writing is we have to write, we have to produce knowledge by writing it and putting it on a kind of a format. But with the internet and with orality, I think through a kind of a decolonial move, we can also rediscover orality and bring it back into the mainstream of argument. So we can at least, rediscover the art of it and make it as valuable as text-based production, right? And the embodied performance of argumentation can be recorded, can be disseminated and remixed, and thereby becoming units of polymorphous exchanges and productive mutations. And for sure, and this is something important, for sure, the web-based technologies has made the dialogue between intellectual and the public a possibility, not a certainty. So why am I saying all this? Because, and this is where I'm going to so this is the possibility. This is the road that we have to travel. The relationship between the textual and the visual, from the francophone, at least because I'm hailing from Senegal, and the Senegal University is the one that I know most. People more often than not, they think that the text is bookish. Whatever you can study, it has to come from books. Whereas the visual or something that you're witnessing on the street can also be a text, right? I think we have to deconstruct the idea of the text and how we can also incorporate visual-based manifestation of truth. There also have to be more collaborative work between digital humanists, designers, and technologists, because cultural objects and artifacts are moving, or they now inhabit the digital world. So we have also to follow the trend of society and its changes. We can no longer just think that we have just to study bookish knowledge and leave aside what's happening online, because cultural objects and artifacts are inhabiting the digital world. And this means developing more informed literacy is expensive enough to include graphic design, to include visual narrative, time-based media, and also development of art and interfaces, rather than just think that we have to accept them as off-the-shelf product. I'm saying this, and I'm going to finish by. I'm saying this because very recently, and this is why I had my abstract. Very recently, in Senegal, there has emerged kind of what I call radical online radicalism of all sorts. It can be political, it can be religious mainly, where debating about the legacies of our religious brothers is impossible. We can no longer debate them. And there have been some people in Senegal who were bold enough to engage those kind of discussion. Bringing on the table the fact that we have to rethink, we have to critique the legacies of those people. But there have been backlash because and so my question is, why? I want to understand why academics, at least from the Senegal context, they dare not engage those discussion online. We can now, because it is very the online words, Facebook and social media can be very wild. So they dare not engage those critical discussion, because whenever you have a critical stance against what's happening, people might come at you with very difficulty. So I think it is time now that we, at least from our Francophone Senegalese universities, we engage the digital humanities, because a lot is happening on there. And if we don't engage those interaction and those development, we might be losing a lot. And I think it is time also to rethink, like I said at the beginning, how is that, we are discovering, some, for example, the Frantz Fanon, those other, scholars, the African tradition, the radical tradition, it is very difficult to discover them, to talk about them from within our universities. More often than not, we discover them, we talk about them when we go to North American universities. I think there is a lot that we have to do, and I think we can start talking about those issues, and I think people will be willing to engage the discussions. I think this is it for now, and thank you so much for your attention. Dominic, I'm sorry that I shifted the discussion for a more theoretical discussion rather than a methodological one, but I hope that people will have some comments about methodology, how we should engage online ethnography and stuff like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Babacar, for a very rich presentation, and I'm sure it's going to, stimulate the mind of the audience, and that we'll have many questions about that. If you have a question, and yeah, please, Babacar, could you stop sharing the screen? Yeah, thank you very much. So. Yeah, so if anybody has a question, you can, raise your digital hand or your physical hand, but we cannot necessarily see you if you do that. Or you can also ask a question in the chat and ask to be unmuted. So you have all of those options, and I'm sure you are considering the question you're going to ask to Babacar. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Babacar maybe a couple of questions. So my first question would be on the difference between the digital ethnographer, the kind of very discreet presence that, hide or introduce themselves very discreetly and humbly in public digital spaces, in forums, etc. So between this very discreet person and persona and the public intellectual that you described, that might or might not be present in on digital media, what would be the difference in terms maybe of temporalities, because there's a moment for the observation and analysis, and there's a moment for restitution and debate. So I would be interested in how you contrast those two figures that may be the same person. And if you allow me, because I enjoy hearing about research trajectories, I'd love for you to to go back to what we talked together and without the audience, about your own beginning as a social media researcher that was also connected to social movement like Yanama in Senegal. So I would love to have your insight on this. Thank you.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, right. So for your first question, the difference between this social media researcher and the public intellectual, should they is it the same persona? My fundamental question is, and this is also very difficult to answer, shall or should intellectual intervention or interventions always be political? I think it is a question that I have been thinking about, and I still keep thinking about the same question. I think that the social media researcher has also to play the role of a public intellectual, right? Because I don't think that we have just to go online, whether physically, whether we're doing ethnography with a physical space or online ethnography. Just do what we have to do and write reports and master thesis, and that's it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that while doing online ethnography and while engaging in the process of collecting data and analyzing it and writing reports and master, we have also to engage in the public debate. You see what I mean? So I think maybe I haven't understand your question, but I don't think we can draw a line between the digital ethnographer and the idea of the public intellectual who might do something rather than, you know, engaging or doing online. So maybe I didn't understand your question, but I believe that, and it is also a question that I have been keep thinking about it. Should intellectual intervention, should they or shall they be always political? Or it is necessary that what we do at the end, in the end, it has to be political. I think also we have to consider the relationship, our relationship with politics at some point, right? And concerning the second question, you're right, I didn't mention it. What at the end, like I said, 10 years ago, I was doing research on Yanamar, and I wanted to understand this momentum. And I was from afar. I was in the US. I did the work, preliminary work, and I was stuck by some problem. And I talked to my supervisor. I want to do ethnography. I want to interview people. I want to just be on the field and be part and parcel of what's going on. But I couldn't come to Senegal to do it. And luckily for me, she was a professor in the medias and communication studies. And she said to me, you know what? You can do your field on Facebook. At the time, it was really kind of crazy for me because I have never thought about that. How can we do ethnography online? So, and she explained to me, I had a very quick sort of a training about how to do it. So what I did is, because we have, you know, kind of agoras online where people are creating, you know, group discussions on Facebook depending on their, you know, interests. And there were many of them, you know, there were group discussions formed by Senegalese only on the continent or in the country, also people from the diaspora. So in terms of ethics at the time, I just had to introduce myself, say, this is me, I'm doing this, you know, I'm here to do ethnography. Some people were very reluctant to engage with me because, you know, and I had to make sure that, you know, I have to do it. I have to anonymize the names for some people, but luckily for me, other people just, you know, they gave their consent. For me, I could put their name on the step. Also, I could quote what they were posting or what they were writing. So it was very difficult though. I had to be there 24/7, always following the discussions. And, you know, choosing what I thought was most relevant for my topic, and then having to, you know, to put those posts together. So it was not easy, and at that time it was the first time I was doing it. But luckily, I could just I started doing it, and it was something very new for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Babakar. And I will have a follow-up question, but I will allow for other folks to also ask their questions. And we have one from Divine. Divine, would you like to just turn on your mic, or otherwise okay. I will have to read your very long question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's to first, I mean, thank Babakar for his talk, and then but just to try to follow up and try to trouble the water, since Babakar has generously insisted that we should focus on theory, and perhaps one should start by asking, given what you foregrounded, you know, should we be taking theory any serious? Should we take theory seriously? I mean, given how you began, especially that you had to go to the US to discover Senghor, to discover, you know, Fanon, and the question, should we be bringing them back, you know, and should we be bringing them back with theory? And then onto that, I then want to just build on this context and this critique around decolonization and decoloniality, and this is more just to push to think. And here I'm asking several questions, and one is just to reflect on the intellectual again. Isn't the intellectual overrated? one of those figures that we have inherited without critique, and we do not want to give up, because when we give it up, it also means that we lose a particular place and space in society as people who are kind of an intelligentsia. Should we, in reimagining this new space, take the intellectual seriously, or should we dismiss the intellectual, given that you're talking about different, alternative ways or all other forms of archives that we need to take more seriously? And here I'm just pushing to think, so who then is an intellectual in this space, given the inheritance that we have, and given the histories and the etymologies of this particular concept and this particular figure, who is like this extraordinary being within society, grounded in academia and science, and who can translate, knowledge, from science to society. Should we this homme de lettres? And I think in other instances, I think they were called litari, or there were all these terms that were used, to describe this particular group of people. But should we take them seriously? Who should they be in our context, and how should we be relating to them? And then you spoke about public engagement, and I just also want to trouble that for you to reflect a bit on that. So what should we be considering the public, especially if in the context in which we are located, people whom we call intellectuals are supposed to be people who are deeply embedded in social relations and deeply embedded in society. So what should we see as public engagement and the public in this sense? And I think that should be my question.
Yes, Divine. I mean, I think it is a question, but it is also more of an contribution, trying to push the discussion. You're absolutely right. I started stuff by talking about the academy at some point, and like I said previously, if you go outside here and ask the simple question, who is the intellectual? People are going to say the intellectual is l'académicien, l'homme de lettres, the man who is at the university teaching, or sometimes the man who has a kind of a European-centered education, right? I have been engaging, the communities very recently. And I went to Funjun, for example, I went to Nyongolor, and I went to other communities where we're talking about important issues. For example, the need to reconsider tradition or some ceremonies, the need to discuss how Islamization is infringing upon some kinds of tradition. And luckily, for example, there was one conference, we invited a guy who is not an academician or intellectual, at least from the university understanding of it. He came to the village, and he gave a talk, but in Serer, for example. We could have done it in French, but instead we decided that we are going to talk to the people, to the communities, and to talk our native tongue. And what I got from the audience was that people took the floor. They were discussing the topic, and it was deeply, deeply critical. At some point they understand more than us here what are the current state of their communities' concerns, right? And so at some point I was saying that shouldn't those people also at some point they can be termed intellectual, because they intellectual at least from the etymology of the word, somebody who's using kind of rational thinking and logic in order to understand what is happening around him or her. At that level, I think that intellectuals are not only people who have PhDs or professorship or what have you, but people who understand critically what is happening in underground. So at that point, we should not take seriously intellectual from the academy, but maybe we should also listen to the people at the grassroots level, because at some point also they understand logically, they think and critically about what is happening in their community. So this is what I wanted to say. Maybe we have to think about also what does it mean to be intellectual now from a decolonial perspective. Maybe at that point we could broaden the intellectual who can be intellectual, or either he's someone who can write, or either also he's or someone who is just thinking critically without maybe a formal education, what have you. Maybe and I hope also I have answered to your question, Divine.
Thank you so much, Babakar, for your answer. And I think Divine is indicating that you answered this question. I will piggyback on Divine's question, but first we have Vanessa. Vanessa is going to ask your question. Vanessa, can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
There we go. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Babakar. It's very interesting, actually. So I'm just thinking, just in the grain of thinking about different ways in which we come to know, right? So kind of typically, I guess, and kind of the knee-jerk reaction to thinking about knowing and therefore being classified or categorized as an intellectual is through kind of very rational, logical, systematic, very Western way of, processing information. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on kind of designating the term or stretching the term intellectual to also include other ways of knowing, right? Like feeling and other ways, I suppose, other ways of having an experience, and what perhaps have you thought perhaps like what that would actually mean for understanding not only what it means to know, but who then becomes an intellectual, who's left outside of that term and who's included in it, So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. Thanks, Vanessa, for your question. I think it is a very important question. Of course, again, talking back to those people that I have been engaging with in the communities, there are people of my ethnic group. So we have, of course, there is a kind of a very intimate relationship, because we are from the same ethnic group, we speak the same language. So at some point we are able to understand each other, right? And we might have the same concerns, the same feelings, because at some point, and this is a question that I will be engaging with more in the future. More and more, my ethnic group, the Serets, people are saying the language is going to disappear within half a century, and and this is a big concern. And people, because the Serets at some point, and maybe here we're talking about Loposeda Senghor, who has been theorizing hybridite or whatnot. So the Serets are amongst the ethnic group whose openness is at some point a problem, so whenever they migrate to the city centers, they tend to become, which is good because any society has to be open, but at some point, too much of openness can be also such a problem. So that's why I could have a connection, myself and those people who have no schooling whatsoever, at least from the Western understanding of the term. So we sort of share a kind of emotive, sort of affective, psychological, whatever it is. So we have the same feeling. Myself, I am married to a Wolof woman who lives in France. My daughter is not going to be Serer at some point because she does not speak Serer. And at some point, I feel guilty about that. My daughter is 2.5 years and she understands Wolof already. But but the father, Serer, I speak Serer perfectly. I don't have the mechanisms to speak Serer to her. And this is a big problem to me. And one day I spoke to Serer to her, and then she was completely lost because she had never heard a word of. So having the same concern at my level, how can I make sure that my daughter speaks Serer? And themselves in those communities having the same concern, how can we preserve our tradition or whatever it is? So I think also there are different kinds of knowing, which is the feelings and the affective dimension of what is happening around us. It is not only rational or logical, but also it can be emotive. And there is a very nice piece by Senghor, written in, I think, in 1960. Now, today, Divine, I'm going to be Senghorist for today. The psychology of the Negro, right? And Senghor was saying something interesting, you know, emotive, between two words, right? Emotive intelligence rather than rational intelligence. So at some point, I think also emotions, affect can also be part and parcel of ways in which we can make sense of what's happening, and we can also know the word and, you know, source of knowledge. I think it is not only rationality but also affective and also emotive at some point.
Thank you so much, Babacar. Waiting for other hands to be raised, I'm going to use this time to ask my question. So I wanted to go back to my first question in a way that you know, also integrate like one provocative question that Divine had when saying, why do we need intellectuals? And so what I was trying to figure out, right, it was about the presence of the researcher online. So I guess what I don't necessarily understand is, why do we need to be knowing, to be like, you know, to embody knowledge as we observe and interact for our research? Like, why do we need any kind of authority? And can we remove all of our, you know, I don't know, expert persona in order to give space to others and to learn from the conversation that are happening online in languages that we, you know, all languages possible. So yeah, I just want to have your opinion on this.
It's muted.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dominique, for your question. At some point I said it, the web-based technologies, if there is something interesting with them, it is that, you know, the authority of, you know, the intellectual or the ethnographer is just dying away, you know, because it is a word where people, you know, sometimes more often than not, people don't know each other. So you have at least, you know, the status and the authority of the researcher is just vanishing. And I think it is something very, very good, you know.
Okay.
It's very, absolutely. So it's very good because, you know, it is open-ended. You know, sometimes you, even though people know you, even though they know that you are a man coming from academy, at some point, the structure and the fluidity of the exchanges makes it difficult for you, you know, to claim authority. It is just impossible because, you know, it is just open, even though, you know, it can be wide at some point. You know, myself, I inhabit the online. I'm just present there, you know, and I'm just engaging with people as if I'm just a normal person, you know. And the thing is, I think at some point they said it. The structure of the thing is so evasive and it is so fluid that, you know, we can no longer claim any kind of authority. We can no longer claim any kind of knowing because, you know, at some point you are sharing the space with people who might know more than you actually on the same topic. And it comes with intellectual humility at some point, you know, and that's why I understand from here at least. I've been organizing some webinars, I've been organizing discussion online. And when I invite some people from the academy here, they are reluctant to come and talk because they know behind that the space is very open and it can be wild, you know. Teaching in a physical class-based seminar is very different from just engaging with people online, because you can master your audience with the classroom, but you can't master the audience online. That's why most people, they are very reluctant to be present or to come and engage with people because they know behind that, you know, it is a very different speciality, right? That's why, you know, I'm saying that yes, Divine, we no longer need to talk about the intellectual. Maybe we have to find a new word, but we just need to talk about how we should engage as fellow human beings, regardless of we are doing research here at Huma or regardless we are at the village, you know, in the village doing so. I think at some point we have to, you know, we have to just to shake off, you know, the affiliative, whatever power we have, just engage with people as human beings, first of all, I think. So yes, Dominic, the power has to vanish, and the power is vanishing at least. But we have to make sure that also, and I think at some point I said it, it is not about the tool. It is not about the technology or the tool. It is also our awareness, our attitude, in the space that will make a difference, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for insisting on that. And I heard your point. I wanted to push a little bit. I also want to challenge the idea that the power differential is totally vanishing online. As we see, there's like new ways of asserting authority. There's like number of followers. There's affiliation. Like if you want to present authority, there is like your profile picture, your profile, the name of the institution that you have next to your name, and like all kind of references that help establish the authority. Like to say that, no, I'm not a normal person. I come in the conversation with that power, with that number of fans or followers, etc. So we see new ways of like, reemergence of powers and new figures of intellectuals, or, that may not be exactly what they were, but still exist. So I think we still have, like, for those of us who don't want the power differential, there's still a fight to fight. And yeah. I see that there's a huge conversation happening in the chat, and I don't know where to start. So I think Divine made a few points. I don't know if you would want to contribute early. There's answers from Arnaud and Vanessa. I'm lost. That's chaos.
Yeah. Maybe we should bring all of them on board. I mean,
yes,
Vanessa, Arnaud. And yes, Vanessa, Arnaud, and myself, because I think we are having a discussion around the container and the content, and I think Vanessa is saying that it's like when Francis Nyamjo was asked about roads, and he says roads cannot fall, and it's going to take a long, because even when the statue falls, there's still the practices that happen. And I think that's what Vanessa is also raising, that, so what happens when we move away from the intellect, what happens to the content? So it's about the content and the container. What do you do? Because one of the things that you raised was how we move on with decolonization and what it means, to move on with decolonization. At least for some of us, decolonization is about an enrichment rather than a kind of, how do you say, annihilation and abandonment. It's a form of expansion, expanding knowledge and including, being part of thinking the world rather than being an exclusive, narrow, provincialized space. So, but what we're asking here is the question that I think you're trying to answer and also struggling to deal with. It's like, what should we do with the intellectual? And what happens when we begin to think about what to do with the intellectual? And what if we did do away with the intellectual? So what becomes of us, and what becomes of what we aim to do? And how does that also shape how we begin to train people who then become an intellectual? Because that was one of the issues that you raised about curriculum and curriculum development. But it also relates to, I mean, you are invested in this and are trained in this and can better inform us. Why was SART so invested in this notion, because I mean, we think through many ways. Why we ask the question about the public sphere, because the public sphere has a particular history. It comes from a particular place, and also public engagement itself, which was a place that excluded lots of other people, particularly women. So, so what does it mean, to be taking this seriously and moving on with it? And what does it mean to be rethinking it, and pushing? And can we really change it? Can we really rethink it? And I think that's a debate that we are trying to have in the chat.
Yes, yes, Divine. I was following the debate. Of course, at some point you're mentioning that why at least why I was talking about Sartre and Frantz Fanon at some point, because it is, you know, the critique we might have against those people is that they thought of the African humanities, or the way to be African, always in the Hegelian kind of master-slave dialectics. You know, Africans have to claim the humanity vis-a-vis the West, and I think we have to take a different road. Our humanity has to be created within ourselves, I think, at some point. You know, so we have to turn. You know, we have to. You know, we have to create our humanity within ourselves, because at some point, even Fanon, you know, Fanon has been, you know, but even Fanon is immersed in this kind of, you know, Hegelian dialectic. So at some point we have to, that's why I was talking about the communities, you know, going back to the communities and just thinking ways in which we can engage with them, instead of always, you know, wanting to say that I am an intellectual because I have Western-based conceptions and knowledge of the world, you know. That's why, so if you're talking about humanities, we have to talk about maybe a different way of thinking about our humanity, which is going to be based from within our own relations, without having to be measured by a kind of Eurocentric tool of measurement, right? And second, yes, what the container and the content, I think also it is a big question that I keep thinking about, you know. And again, at some point, we have also to think about the risks of engaging that discussion. At SIT, for example, I've directing some programs about decolonial hip hop or whatever, and I used to invite people who are not part of the academy, for example, hip hoppers, you know, and activists, you know. I used to invite them in my seminar. They used to come not as just hip hoppers, but as guest lecturers, because at some point also they are street intellectuals at some point. It was interesting, you know, how to talk about urban culture or whatever. But the risk was, at least for me, people who was following those development, at some point they call me activist at some point, and I don't know why. So, you know, and within the university, if you have that label, someone is an activist, someone is doing something radical, it can be risky at some point, at least from the Francophone University, because, you know, we are not there yet, you know, opening the world's university to the world of human culture, the world of activism, you know, what have you. So at some point also we have to be thinking about the risks that are involved in, you know, traveling those radical roads, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I feel like I would have wanted to follow back again, but I want to be reasonable. So I'm going to ask to give a last opportunity to members of the audience to ask a last question. Otherwise, we will start to wrap up the session. Okay, so I don't see any hands. So Babacar, as you've seen, you started a conversation that I'm sure we are going to have again and again at UMA in our own space. It was really amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for, you know, the ideas that you brought and the reflection that, you know, you started among us. So we're very grateful. So our next seminar will be on August 4th. We are taking a break in July. We will be back with a session on mental health and the doctoral trajectory with Dr. Chikeze Uzoembuam, that is also a postdoctoral fellow at UMA. And with UMA colleague Angelique Thomas, who has joined me in the team, we're going to plan a great semester. We have our colleague Ralph Borland also in August, that is going to share his experience as a PhD student a few years back. And we will introduce also many other new thematic cycles during the semester. So please visit our website and check our Facebook page and Twitter accounts for updates. Thank you so much for this. Again, thank you, Babacar, for closing the season, the semester. It was a great end. Thinking about the African intellectual. So yeah, thank you so much, and everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.